Nick Dupree is a young man with muscular dystrophy who uses a motorized wheelchair and a portable ventilator. Personal assistants provided services for 16 hours a day so Nick could attend college and carry on his daily activities. Nick received these services through his state's Medicaid Early and Periodic Screening, Diagnostic and Treatment Program. At age 21, those services end. The only way that Nick could continue to receive the same level of services would be to live in a nursing home. Knowing that this would happen, Nick took on the system. He launched a crusade from his computer to change his state law. He sent emails to legislators and policymakers. Nick also launched his own website. His action resulted in a new Medicaid program that continues in-home personal assistance services for eligible individuals after they turn 21. He achieved this result about 10 days before his 21st birthday. As Nick so aptly demonstrates, the actions of one person can make a huge difference. Unlike Nick, however, people often feel powerless and don't know why or how to change their situation. This module will provide an understanding of the statutory, legal, and regulatory aspects of independent living in order to understand how we may change society through existing laws. You have already learned about the early years of the independent living movement. We will now review the significant provisions of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended, the law that provides for independent living, or IL, services. Specific sections of the Rehabilitation Act that apply to independent living are found in Title VII of the law. Part A defines IL services and centers for independent living, including a philosophy of consumer control, peer support, self-help, self-determination, equal access, and individual and system advocacy. These services are designed to maximize the leadership, empowerment, independence, and productivity of individuals with disabilities, which enables their integration and full inclusion into the mainstream of American society. The law also lays out the requirements for a state plan, establishment and composition of a statewide independent living council, coordination of services, and reports. These reports help demonstrate the significant impact that Centers for Independent Living have made in the lives of thousands of individuals with disabilities. Gordon Richens, who was a full-time farmer before his accident, is just one example. After rehabilitation, he got involved with the local Center for Independent Living. Besides receiving peer support, he learned the necessary IL skills that helped him continue to live in the community. He also discovered how to maximize his independence by taking control over the decisions concerning his life. Gordon Richens now works full-time in a program that supports the farming community. He is actively involved in the disability community and is a tremendous state and national advocate for others with disabilities. Part B of the Rehabilitation Act, which was modified in the 1992 reauthorization, was written to provide resources relating to the statewide Independent Living Council, to provide IL services to individuals with severe disabilities, to demonstrate ways to expand and improve IL services, to support the operation of Centers for Independent Living, to support activities to increase the capacities of public or nonprofit agencies to develop comprehensive systems to provide IL services, to train individuals with disabilities, service providers, and others regarding the IL philosophy, and to provide outreach to unserved and underserved populations. Part C, as reauthorized in 1992, sets out the specifics of funding, which is based primarily on population. Part C also details the services to be offered by Centers for Independent Living, or CILs, requirements for new CILs, standards and assurances for CILs, including the philosophy of independent living, consumer control, self-help, and self-advocacy, development of peer relationships and peer role models, and equal access for individuals with severe disabilities to society. Chapter 2 defines and outlines IL services to assist older individuals who are blind become more mobile, self-sufficient, and independent. Section 509 of Title V, as reauthorized, provides funds for the protection and advocacy of individual rights to the designated protection and advocacy agency in every state. So, if a person with a disability is denied access to a state or federally funded program or to a public accommodation, an attorney from the Protection and Advocacy Agency might provide representation in a mediation effort and/or in court. Significant changes are often made with each reauthorization of any law. Centers for Independent Living were a new addition to the 1978 reauthorization. Statewide independent living councils were added in 1992. There are now nearly 500 centers for independent living in the United States. Centers for Independent Living provide services to individuals with all different types of disabilities and of all ages, as well as culturally, ethnically, and linguistically diverse populations. The core services that all Centers for Independent Living provide are systems advocacy, individual advocacy, peer counseling, information and referral, and independent living skills training. Centers must meet standards and assurances defined in statute. The Rehabilitation Act is once again under consideration by Congress for reauthorization, with more changes pending. So, why do you need to know this? Why is this important to your work in a Center for Independent Living? You probably know it hasn't always been as good as it is now for people with disabilities, nor is our world perfect by any stretch of the imagination. From other parts of this curriculum, you have learned of the struggles to enact legislation and regulations that benefit people with disabilities. You have learned of the time it took to achieve some success. You are a part of our changing nation, along with people with disabilities, their families, and friends. None of the laws currently in place, including the Rehabilitation Act, is perfect. You can help to make it better through your knowledge, your experience, your ability, and your advocacy to make change. It is critical to become informed, because informed knowledge is power. Stay aware of activities in Congress and the courts impacting people with disabilities. Establish and build relationships with your legislators so they turn to you for information on disability issues. This will place you in a position to influence decisions impacting people with disabilities. Become involved in decisions that impact your life and can influence the quality of life for people with disabilities. One way to become involved is to join organizations that support independent living, such as the National Council on Independent Living, or NICL, the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, APRIL, and the American Disabled for Attendant Programs Today, ADAPT. NICL was founded in 1982 and represents over 700 individuals and organizations, including Centers for Independent Living, statewide councils for independent living, and other organizations that advocate for the human and civil rights of people with disabilities throughout the U.S. NICL provides strong national advocacy with member alerts when grassroots action is needed. NICL provides support and training to centers and statewide councils in organizational development, coalition building, strategic planning to accomplish community systems change, national disability policies, and law. NICL also provides advocacy at the national level on issues determined by members and technical assistance where needed. There are any number of statutes and regulations that impact people with disabilities. This module will briefly address just a few of the statutes most relevant to your work in independent living. We encourage you to learn more. After many years of struggles, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed and signed by President George Bush in the presence of thousands of advocates on July 26, 1990. This law created broad civil rights protections for people with disabilities and was modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The ADA covers employment, public services, public accommodations, and telecommunications. The ADA enabled millions of people with disabilities to go to work, participate in community life, access state and local government programs and activities, access public transportation, and much, much more. The Architectural Barriers Act of 1968 was designed to eliminate architectural barriers in all federally owned and leased buildings. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 contains a critical provision that impacts all of us in many ways. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act requires that any entity which receives federal funds may not discriminate against people with disabilities. This provision impacts education, community life, and employment. Additionally, the 1978 amendment of the Rehabilitation Act created the Centers for Independent Living. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, formerly known as PL 94-142, was passed in 1975. For the first time in history, children with disabilities had the mandated right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. This statute is critical for the educational opportunities and future of all people with disabilities. The Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988 prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities in housing. It is unlawful to deny a dwelling to a buyer or renter because of the disability of that individual, an individual associated with the buyer or renter, or an individual who intends to live in the residence. Every state and territory in the nation has an Assistive Technology Act program funded under the Technology-Related Assistance Act of 1988. The Assistive Technology Act of 2004 supports the continuation of these programs and provides for device demonstration, device loan and reutilization programs, training and technical assistance, and alternative financing programs. The Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act of 1999 made many changes to the Social Security Disability Programs, SSI and SSDI, Medicare, and Medicaid to encourage working by people with disabilities. How can we use these laws to accomplish the work of Centers for Independent Living? A basic knowledge of each of these important statutes can help you in your work with individuals with disabilities. These laws provide a range of policies that impact people in all walks of life. Sometimes, knowing that a statute or regulation exists can help you solve a problem for someone. For instance, you may be asked to help a person access work, request accommodations, locate an accessible place to live, or participate in their community in a meaningful way. Who's got the power? We have the power. It's the law. As you've heard previously, it hasn't always been the way it is now. As learned in previous modules, the situation for people with disabilities has been difficult at best. However, none of these laws is perfect. All are open to improvement. It can always get better through your efforts. We can help make policies better through understanding the laws that impact the lives of people with disabilities with whom we work, and the implications of those laws. These laws, and others not even mentioned here, give you the tools to be a change agent.